In the end, they would not speak of the battle, of the ordnance, or of the fear. They would speak of the silence that came after. They would talk about the woman who had brought it. She arrived as a whisper, a civilian analyst no one quite understood, and when the mountain held its breath, ready to shatter their world, she was the one who taught it how to breathe again. She did not raise her voice, she did not wear a uniform, and she did not ask for their respect. She commanded it, with nothing more than cold data and a will as ancient and unyielding as the rock around them. The air at Forward Operating Base Vigilance was a thin, sharp thing, a blade of ice in the lungs. At 11,000 feet in the Zagros Massif, oxygen was a currency, and everyone was in debt. The silence of the high peaks was a physical presence, a weight that pressed down on the corrugated metal roofs of the HAB units and seeped through the triple-paned ballistic glass of the command center. It was a silence that listened. Ilara Vance listened back. She sat at a modular workstation crammed into a corner of the Tactical Operations Center, a space carved out for her as an afterthought. Her official title was Geophysical Analyst, a civilian contractor tasked with studying the tectonic stability of the region, a cover so bland it was practically invisible. The three monitors before her displayed not troop movements or drone feeds, but cascading strings of alphanumeric data, seismic waveforms, and gravimetric resonance charts. To the soldiers who strode past in their heavy boots, their gear clinking with the grim percussion of war, she was just part of the furniture. A strange, quiet woman with eyes the color of a winter sky, who stared at squiggly lines all day. Her focus was absolute, a state of being she had cultivated over a decade spent in places far worse than this. She filtered out the low hum of the base's life support, the crackle of intermittent radio chatter, the rhythmic thud of a generator fighting the altitude. Instead, she was attuned to a different set of frequencies. The deep, lithic groans of the mountain, the subtle shifts in hydrostatic pressure in the aquifers miles below, the faint, almost imperceptible vibrations that traveled through the bedrock, a language she had spent her life learning to translate. Her fingers moved with quiet economy across a keyboard, her expression unreadable. She was tracing a ghost signal, a periodic resonance anomaly that didn't fit any known geological model. It was too regular, too rhythmic. It was a heartbeat where there should have been only stone. The door to the TOC hissed open, admitting a blast of frigid air and a man who seemed to carry his own weather system. Captain Jonathan Decker was a bull of a man, his chest puffed out with the self-importance of someone who believed rank was a synonym for intelligence. His face was perpetually flushed, a combination of the altitude and a simmering low-grade fury at a world that did not always bend to his will. He surveyed the room, his gaze a physical force meant to intimidate, to assert his dominance over this metallic bubble of military order. His eyes swept past the comm station, the drone operators, the intel analysts, and finally snagged on Vance. He saw a civilian, an anomaly, a disruption to the crisp, uniformed perfection of his command. "Still staring at your rocks, Dr. Vance." His voice was a blunt instrument, loud in the tense quiet of the room. He did not use her actual surname. The honorific was a barb, a way to frame her as an academic, something soft and useless in his world of hard realities. Vance did not look up. Her focus remained on the screen where a new data point had just registered, a flicker of red against a sea of placid blue. "The rocks are speaking, Captain," she replied, her voice low and even, devoid of inflection. "I am merely listening." Decker grunted, a sound of profound dismissal. He moved deeper into the room, his boots loud on the grated floor. He needed noise, motion, the tangible evidence of action. He could not comprehend the value of stillness, of analysis. To him, problems were solved with patrols, firepower, and direct orders shouted with enough force to make them true. This woman, with her silent screens and her cryptic pronouncements, was a source of constant, grating irritation. She had been attached to his command by some high-level order he couldn't circumvent, a bureaucratic thorn in his side. He saw her not as an asset, but as a liability, another variable to manage in an environment already overflowing with them. The mountain was the enemy, the insurgents were the enemy, and in his mind, anything that was not explicitly a weapon under his control was just another form of hostile terrain. Outside the TOC, the world was a study in gray and white. The FOB was a small, defiant scar on the landscape, a collection of prefabricated structures hunkered down against the wind. It was surrounded by a triple-strand concertina wire fence and a perimeter of automated defense turrets, their optical sensors sweeping back and forth in tireless mechanical arcs. Beyond that, the mountains rose like knives, their peaks jagged and unforgiving. It was a place that felt temporary, a foothold against an overwhelming force of nature. The men and women stationed here felt it, the bone-deep sense of being guests in a land that did not want them. They walked with a certain tension, their eyes constantly scanning the ridgelines, waiting for the silence to break. Vance felt it too, but she knew the threat was not just on the ridgelines. It was under their feet. The heartbeat was getting stronger. The incident, when it came, was born of boredom and arrogance, a toxic combination common in isolated military outposts. Vance was walking from the TOC to the mess hall, a short 100-yard journey across the frozen gravel of the compound. The wind was a physical blow, stealing the breath and stinging her exposed cheeks. She moved with a steady, efficient gait, her body angled into the gale, her mind still processing the data stream she had just left behind. The subterranean pulse was synchronizing with a low-band radio frequency, a correlation that made no geological sense but was terrifyingly logical from a signals intelligence perspective. It was engineered. Two recruits, barely out of their teens and puffed up with the unearned confidence of new uniforms and powerful rifles, were loitering near the armory. They saw her coming, the quiet civilian woman who kept to herself. To them, she was an object of curiosity and mild contempt, an outsider who did not share their hardships or their code. One of them, a private named Jennings with a cruel smirk, nudged his friend. He raised his M4 carbine, the barrel sweeping in a lazy, deliberate arc until the optical sight centered on Vance's head. He didn't have his finger on the trigger, but it was a violation so profound, so deeply ingrained in the firearm safety protocols every soldier learned from day one, that it was tantamount to a direct threat. Vance stopped. She did not flinch, did not gasp, did not show any outward sign of alarm. Her mind, trained for instantaneous threat assessment, processed the scene with clinical detachment. She saw the slack posture of the recruit, the way he held the weapon as a toy, not a tool. She registered the slight tremor in his hands, a sign of nervousness, not intent. She saw his friend's hesitant, stupid grin. Her own heart rate remained a steady 60 beats per minute. Her breathing was even. She was a statue in the biting wind, her gaze fixed on the young man playing God with a pound of steel and polymer. Her internal state was a cascade of calculations. Distance, 25 meters. Wind, gusting from port, approximately 30 knots. Her path to cover, 5 meters to the side, behind a concrete blast barrier. The recruit's reaction time, assuming average reflexes and factoring in the altitude-induced hypoxia, approximately 0.75 seconds. Her own, less than a third of that. She cataloged the vulnerabilities in his stance. The unlocked knees. The weight shifted too far back on his heels. In 3 movements, she could have disarmed him and broken his arm. In 4, he would be unconscious on the ground. She did none of these things. Her mission here was to remain a ghost, an analyst. Revealing her true capabilities was not an option, not yet. Something you need, Private? Her voice was perfectly calm, carrying over the wind without any hint of strain or fear. It was the voice of someone asking for the time, not someone looking down the barrel of a rifle. The recruit, Jennings, was momentarily taken aback by her lack of reaction. He had expected fear, or anger, or a panicked shout. Her stillness was unnerving. It stole his power. He lowered the rifle slightly, his smirk faltering. "Just making sure our civilian assets are secure," he stammered, trying to reframe his idiocy as diligence. Before Vance could respond, another voice cut through the air, sharp and furious. "Jennings, what in the 7 hells do you think you're doing?" Sergeant Marcus Thorne moved with the predatory grace of a career NCO. He was a lanky, weathered man with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. He had seen the entire exchange from the doorway of the comm shack. He was on the recruit in 3 long strides, his hand grabbing the barrel of the M4 and forcing it down toward the ground with contemptuous ease. "You ever point a weapon at anyone you don't intend to kill, you worthless sack?" Thorne's voice was a low growl, far more menacing than Decker's parade ground shouting. "You think this is a game? Drop and give me 50, now, both of you." The 2 recruits, their faces pale with shock and sudden fear, immediately dropped to the gravel, their groans lost in the wind as they began their penance. Thorne did not watch them. His attention was on Vance. He saw no lingering fear in her eyes, only a quiet, unnerving calm. He had been around long enough to recognize the difference between someone who was scared and someone who was simply assessing. She was the latter. "My apologies, ma'am," Thorne said, his tone respectful. "There's no excuse for that kind of behavior." "They are children, Sergeant," Vance stated, a simple observation of fact. "Children with dangerous toys." She gave Thorne a brief, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement, then turned and continued on her way to the mess hall as if nothing had happened. The incident did not go unnoticed. Later that day, Vance was summoned to Captain Decker's office. It was a small, Spartan room, the only decoration a framed guidon from his previous command. Decker was behind his desk, leaning back in his chair, the very picture of condescending authority. He had already heard the story, twisted through the barracks rumor mill into a tale of a hysterical civilian overreacting to a harmless joke. "Vance," he began, not bothering with any pretense of politeness, "I need to talk to you about this morning's misunderstanding." "There was no misunderstanding, Captain," she replied, standing perfectly still in the center of the room. "A soldier pointed his weapon at me. Sergeant Thorne corrected him." Decker's eyes narrowed. He steepled his fingers, a gesture he probably thought made him look thoughtful. "Look, these kids are under a lot of pressure, stuck up here on this rock pile. Sometimes they blow off steam in inappropriate ways. Jennings is a good soldier. He made a mistake. He's been disciplined. I need you to understand the environment you're in. This isn't some university lab. Things are a little more raw here. He was lecturing her, framing her as the problem, the outsider who didn't understand their culture. Vance's expression did not change. Her gaze was direct, her stillness a form of pressure he was not accustomed to. I am fully aware of the environment, Captain. My concern is not for my personal safety. It is for your command's discipline. A soldier who treats his weapon as a toy will treat the enemy as a caricature. He will make a mistake that costs lives. That is a tactical problem, not a cultural one. The clinical precision of her words seemed to infuriate Decker. He slammed his hand flat on the desk. Your job is to look at rocks. My job is to command this unit. Do not presume to lecture me on tactics or discipline. You are a civilian. You are a guest here. Remember that. Are we clear? Perfectly, Vance said. The single word was as cold and sharp as the mountain air. She turned and walked out, leaving Decker fuming in her wake. He felt like he had been dismissed, and he could not comprehend how she had done it without raising her voice or challenging his rank. He was the one with the authority, yet he was the one who felt small. His dislike for her curdled into something hotter, more personal. He would find a way to put her in her place. A week later, the mountain began to kill them. It started with Patrol Bravo, a 6-man team on a routine reconnaissance sweep of the northern ridge. They were due to check in at 0800. At 0805, the comms were still silent. At 0810, Decker was on the radio himself, his voice tight with irritation. There was no response. A drone was launched, its high-resolution camera sweeping the patrol's designated route. It found nothing. No tracks in the thin layer of snow. No bodies. No signs of a struggle. It was as if the 6 men and their vehicle had been plucked from the face of the earth. The FOB went on high alert. The perimeter was locked down. Decker stood in the center of the TOC, barking orders. I want a full-spectrum sweep. Thermal, satellite, SIGINT. Find them. Find who took them. The analysts bent to their tasks, their faces grim. Hours passed. The results were maddeningly uniform. Nothing. The thermal sensors showed only the cold rock of the mountains. The satellite imagery was clear. The signals intelligence analysts picked up nothing but the usual background radiation and the faint rhythmic pulse that Vance had been tracking for weeks. What is that? Decker demanded, stabbing a finger at Vance's screen, where the pulse was now a solid, angry red line. Is that them? Is that an enemy transmission? No, Captain, Vance said, her eyes not leaving the data. That is not a transmission. It's a resonance. It's coming from the ground beneath us. And it is no longer periodic. It's constant. English, Vance. Speak English. They are not using radios, she explained, finally turning to face him. Her voice was flat, delivering an analysis, not an opinion. They are using the ground itself. The rock here is a specific type of crystalline schist, riddled with quartz veins. It has a high resonant frequency. They are using low-frequency acoustic devices to communicate through the stone, like a planet-sized telegraph. That is why your SIGINT is blind. They aren't broadcasting through the air. Decker stared at her, his expression a mixture of disbelief and contempt. Acoustic devices? Rock telegraphs? What is this? Science fiction? We are being attacked by insurgents with rusty AK-47s, not some advanced alien race. Find me a radio signal. He turned his back on her, dismissing her analysis as the ravings of a mad geologist. He ordered another patrol out, a heavier, more heavily armed quick reaction force, to to sweep the area where Patrol Bravo had disappeared. Sergeant Thorne was part of the QRF, his face a grim mask as he listened to Decker's briefing. Before he left, he stopped by Vance's station. "You really think they're talking through the rock?" he asked quietly. "I don't think it, Sergeant. The data confirms it," she said. "The pulse has a carrier wave and a modulated signal overlaid. It is complex. It is language. And it is not just communication. They are using it for imaging." Thorne frowned. "Imaging? Seismic reflection, like a submarine sonar. They are pinging the mountain and listening to the echoes. They are mapping. They mapped the patrol route. They knew exactly where Bravo would be, long before they got there. Tell your men to stay off the predictable paths, stay off the trails, move across open, solid rock where possible. Avoid ravines and overhangs." Thorne looked from her intense, focused face to the captain, who was busy shouting at a drone operator. He had a choice: follow the orders of his commander, or trust the strange, quiet woman who seemed to see a different world than the rest of them. He nodded slowly. "I'll keep that in mind." The quick reaction force was out for 6 hours. They followed Thorne's modified route, sticking to exposed ridges and avoiding the narrow valleys. They found the remains of Patrol Bravo's vehicle. It was at the bottom of a narrow, previously unmapped crevasse, crushed and torn apart. The cause was immediately obvious. The entire rock shelf that had formed the trail above it had collapsed. It was not an explosion. It was a geological event, precise and devastatingly effective. There were no bodies, only the mangled steel of the vehicle, swallowed by the mountain. The news hit the FOB like a physical shock. The invulnerable bubble of safety had been pierced. The enemy was not just outside the wire, they were part of the landscape. Decker's reaction was one of rage. He saw it as a failure of his men, a failure of vigilance. He refused to accept the implications of what the QRF had found. "It was a natural rock slide," he bellowed in the debriefing. "A tragic accident. The enemy got lucky." "With respect, sir," Thorne interjected, his voice steady despite the captain's fury. "That shelf was solid granite. We've driven over it 100 times. It didn't just collapse. It was deliberate. And there were tracks leading away from the crevasse. On the other side, they took our people." "Nonsense," Decker roared. "You are letting this place get to you, Sergeant. You're seeing ghosts." "He is not seeing ghosts, Captain," Vance's voice cut through the room. She had walked to the central holo table, her datapad in her hand. "He is seeing the truth you refuse to. May I?" She gestured to the table's control panel. Decker was about to refuse, but something in her tone, a new edge of authority, gave him pause. Thorne and the other NCOs were looking at her, not at him. He grunted a reluctant assent. Vance interfaced her datapad with the holo table. The standard 3D topographical map of the area flickered and was replaced by a new image, a ghostly translucent representation of the mountain range. It was her data, rendered visually. A complex web-like structure of faint lines glowed within the mountains, a subterranean network of impossibly vast scale. "This is the Zagros Massif as I see it," she began, her voice the calm center of the storm. "What you see as solid rock is not. This entire range is a karst formation, a labyrinth of interconnected caves, tunnels, and voids created by water erosion over millions of years. Most are dormant and sealed, but not all of them." She manipulated the image, zooming in on FOB vigilance. A dense cluster of tunnels was visible directly beneath the base. "The enemy is not on the mountain. They are in the mountain. They have been using these natural tunnel systems for generations. They are moving troops, equipment, and supplies completely shielded from our surveillance. They are not attacking us from the outside. They are all around us. They are beneath our feet right now. A heavy silence fell over the TOC. The drone operators and analysts stared at the holographic image, their faces pale. The idea was terrifying, a violation of their fundamental understanding of the battlefield. Decker laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "This is insane. You're telling me there's a goblin city under my base because your magic rock detector told you so? I have had enough of your fantasies, Vance. This is a military operation, not a fairy tale. Shut that thing off." "The collapse that took Patrol Bravo was not a natural rock slide," Vance continued, ignoring him completely. Authority was beginning to flow to her, not because she was seizing it, but because she was the only one making sense. It was a targeted, resonant demolition. They used a precisely tuned acoustic frequency to shatter the crystalline structure of that specific rock shelf. It's an old mining technique amplified to a terrifying scale. They did not need a pound of C4. They used a speaker and a laptop. They are more technologically sophisticated than you are willing to believe, and their understanding of this environment is total. They know this mountain down to the last crystal. She looked directly at Decker, her eyes holding his. They are not just moving through the tunnels. They are staging. My analysis of the resonance patterns shows a massive buildup of personnel and equipment in a primary cavern system, approximately 2 kilometers north of our position. Based on the rate of increase, I project they will reach critical mass for a full-scale assault within 12 hours. Their attack will not come from the perimeter. It will come from below. They will emerge inside the wire. They will slaughter us all. The clinical, matter-of-fact way she delivered this apocalyptic prophecy was more terrifying than any shout. The air in the room grew thick, heavy with the sudden, crushing weight of belief. The men and women in the TOC looked from the holographic map to their captain, waiting for his response, for his plan. Decker's face was a mask of crimson fury and wounded pride. This civilian, this woman, had publicly usurped his authority, presenting a scenario that made all his methods, all his experience, utterly irrelevant. His worldview was collapsing, and he reacted with pure, blind rage. "This is mutiny," he snarled, his voice trembling. "You are spreading fear and panic with this unsubstantiated garbage. I am the commander of this FOB. I will have you arrested, Sergeant." He pointed a shaking finger at Vance. "Take this woman into custody. Confine her to her quarters." Sergeant Thorne did not move. He looked at Vance. He looked at the map. He looked at the terrified faces of his fellow soldiers. Then he looked back at his captain. "No, sir," he said, his voice quiet but firm. A gasp went through the room. It was a direct refusal of a lawful order. "What did you say, Sergeant?" Decker whispered, his voice dangerously low. "I said no, sir," Thorne repeated, taking a half step to position himself slightly between Decker and Vance. "Everything she's said so far has been proven right. Everything you've ordered has failed. Our men are gone. We are blind. She is the only one with eyes. I'm listening to her." It was the turning point. The moment the formal hierarchy of rank shattered against the undeniable hierarchy of competence. One by one, the other senior NCOs in the room shifted their stance, their expressions hardening. They were with Thorne. They were with Vance. Decker stood alone, his authority evaporated. He stared at the faces that had, minutes before, looked to him for guidance, and saw only cold judgment. He was a king without a kingdom. Vance did not acknowledge his breakdown. The problem was the enemy, not the man. "We have a 12-hour window," she stated, her voice cutting through the tension. "We can use their own methods against them. We can use the mountain." She turned back to the hollow table, her focus absolute. The moment of social upheaval was over. The tactical problem remained. "I need 3 things. I need every seismic charge we have on this base. I need access to the primary power grid, specifically the main transformer array. And I need a team of engineers who can follow precise instructions without question." Thorne stepped forward. "You've got them. What's the plan?" Vance's plan was audacious, elegant, and terrifying. It was not a plan of brute force, but of resonance and geology, a checkmate written in the language of physics. She intended to turn the entire mountain massif into a weapon. The enemy was using acoustic resonance on a small scale to demolish a rock shelf. She was going to do it on a colossal scale, using the base's power grid to generate a signal so powerful it would create a targeted sympathetic resonance cascade. "The main enemy staging area is here," she said, pointing to a large glowing void on the holographic map. "It's a cathedral cavern, the nexus of several major tunnels. It is their highway in and out. The cavern itself is structurally sound, but the primary access tunnel here," she indicated a narrow choke point leading into the cavern, "runs directly through a stratum of microfractured calcite. It's geologically unstable, a house of cards." "You're going to collapse it," Thorne breathed, the scale of her idea dawning on him. "I am going to turn it to dust," Vance corrected him. "We will plant the seismic charges at specific resonant nodes across the surface, locations I have already mapped. They will not act as explosives. They will be the tuning forks. The main power will be channeled through a series of improvised transducers your engineers will build. We will pump a massive amount of energy into the ground at a very specific, oscillating frequency. If my calculations are correct, the energy will propagate through the crystalline schist, focusing on the calcite stratum. The calcite will hit its resonant frequency, and the vibrations will shatter its molecular bonds. The tunnel will not just collapse, it will disintegrate." It was a plan that bordered on the arcane. It required a level of understanding of the local geology and physics that no one else possessed. It was also their only hope. Decker stood by his desk, watching, a specter at a feast he had been cast out of. He said nothing. There was nothing left to say. His world had been dismantled by data. The next 8 hours were a blur of controlled, focused activity. Vance became the undisputed center of the FOB. Her voice, calm and precise, was the only one that mattered. She did not shout. She did not command in the traditional sense. She issued instructions, and they were followed without question. Authority had flowed to her, and she wore it like a tool, not an ornament. She directed Thorne's teams to the exact coordinates for the seismic charges, locations that seemed random to the soldiers, but were, to her, the critical nodes of a planetary instrument. 3 feet deep, angled at 17 degrees east, pack the soil tightly. Her instructions were that specific. Meanwhile, in the engineering bay, she stood with the base's chief engineer, a warrant officer named Chen, sketching complex diagrams on a whiteboard. She was explaining how to bypass the grid's safety governors and convert the main transformers into a massive pulsed signal generator. "It's going to overload the entire system," Chen warned, his face slick with sweat. "The transformers will melt. We'll be on battery backup for a week, if we're lucky." A week on batteries is preferable to an eternity in a mass grave, Vance stated simply. Chen nodded and got to work. The risk was enormous, but the alternative was certain death. Vance herself became a node of pure processing. She sat back at her workstation, the 3 monitors now displaying the feed from the seismic charges, the output from the power grid, and a real-time model of the subterranean stress fields. She was a conductor preparing for a symphony of destruction. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, making micro-adjustments to the frequency calculations, accounting for changes in barometric pressure, ground temperature, even the gravitational pull of the moon. Every variable mattered. Thorne stood guard near her station, a self-appointed protector. He watched her, fascinated. She seemed to draw energy from the data. Her focus so complete, it was almost a physical presence in the room. She hadn't eaten or slept. Her only sustenance was a bottle of water she sipped from occasionally. With 1 hour to go until her projected attack time, everything was in place. The charges were set. The grid was hot-wired. The FOB was running on essential systems only. The lights dimmed, the air thick with the smell of ozone from the overloaded transformers. The silence in the TOC was absolute. Every person in the room was watching Vance. "It is time," she announced, her voice cutting through the stillness. She looked at Thorne. "Sergeant, give the evacuation order for all non-essential personnel to move to the central blast shelter. The surface vibrations will be significant." Thorne relayed the order. There was a brief shuffle of movement as people filed out, leaving only the core command team. Vance, Thorne, Chen, and a handful of key operators. Decker remained in his office, the door closed. He was a prisoner of his own failure. Vance placed her hands on her keyboard. On her central screen, the 3D map of the tunnel system pulsed. A red dot indicated the target stratum. "Initiating power sequence," she said. She typed a command string. A deep, low hum began to vibrate through the floor of the TOC. It was a sound felt more than heard, a bass note that resonated in the bones. Chen, watching his monitors, paled. "Grid output is critical. The transformer casings are starting to glow." "Hold it," Vance commanded, her eyes fixed on her own screen. The hum intensified, the vibration growing stronger. Loose items on desks began to rattle. A spider web of cracks appeared on a nearby monitor screen. The mountain was beginning to sing her song. "The seismic charges are synchronized," she reported. "Resonant frequency is building in the bedrock. Target stratum is approaching cascade threshold." The vibration became a violent shudder. The entire FOB was shaking, as if in the grip of an earthquake. A loud groan of stressed metal echoed through the TOC. 95% of calculated energy transfer," Vance said, her voice still impossibly calm amidst the chaos. 97, 99. She watched a single waveform on her screen, a jagged line representing the structural integrity of the calcite layer. It spiked, flattened, then spiked again, violently. "Now," she whispered. She hit a final key. For a terrifying second, the shaking intensified to an unbearable degree. A deep, grinding, tearing sound rose from the depths of the earth, a sound of worlds being unmade. It was the scream of 1,000,000 tons of rock turning to powder. And then silence, a silence more profound, more absolute than any that had come before. The vibration ceased. The humming stopped. The power to the FOB cut out completely, plunging the TOC into darkness, illuminated only by the emergency red lighting and the glow of their battery-powered screens. On Vance's central monitor, the holographic map showed the result. The narrow access tunnel leading to the main cavern was gone. In its place was a massive solid red block labeled Geological Void, Catastrophic Collapse. The House of Cards had fallen. The highway was closed, forever. The threat was neutralized. The enemy force was trapped, entombed. There would be no attack. There would be no slaughter. There would only be the deep, cold silence of the mountain. In the red gloom of the TOC, no one spoke. They stared at the map, their faces a mixture of awe, terror, and profound relief. They had been standing on the precipice of annihilation, and this quiet woman had pulled them back with nothing but mathematics and a deep understanding of the world beneath their feet. She had saved them all. The silence was finally broken by the crackle of a single, high-priority communications channel opening. It was a satellite link, a direct line to the highest echelons of command, a channel that was never, ever used for a simple FOB. A calm, authoritative voice filled the room, a voice that carried the weight of immense power. "This is Admiral Hayes. I do not want to speak to the FOB commander. I want a sitrep from Ghost. Patch me through to Ghost immediately." Every head in the room turned toward Vance. Thorne's eyes widened in sudden, dawning comprehension. Ghost, a legend, a whisper in the intelligence community, a name associated with the most impossible, high-stakes operations of the last decade. A Tier 1 asset so deep under cover their existence was officially denied. He had heard the stories, but he never thought he would meet the reality. Vance picked up the receiver, her movements unhurried. "Ghost here," she said, her voice the same flat, analytical tone she had used all along. "Report," the Admiral's voice commanded. "Subterranean threat neutralized," Vance stated. "Primary access tunnel to enemy staging area has been permanently sealed. Method: induced resonant cascade. Fob vigilance is secure. Collateral damage includes the base's primary power grid and the career of Captain Decker." There was a pause on the other end of the line. The Admiral's voice, when it returned, had a note of grim satisfaction. Understood. His career was over the moment he allowed a recruit to aim a weapon at a Navy SEAL. "I'll handle the cleanup on this end. Your work there is done, Alara. We have a new problem for you in the Atacama Desert. Pack your bags." The revelation landed in the silent room with the force of a physical blow. Navy SEAL. The words hung in the air, recontextualizing everything. Her calm under the rifle barrel, her physical efficiency, her strategic brilliance, her unnerving stillness. It all snapped into focus. She was not a geologist. She was a weapon wrapped in the camouflage of academia. "Acknowledged," Vance said, and severed the connection. She turned from the console. In the dim red light, her face was a mask of cold duty. She looked at Thorne. "Sergeant, I suggest you get your engineers working on the backup generators. You have a long week ahead of you." As she spoke, the door to Decker's office opened. The captain emerged, his face ashen. He had heard everything: the satellite call, the Admiral, the name Ghost, the casual, brutal dismissal of his entire life's work. He looked at Vance, at the woman he had belittled and threatened, and for the first time, he saw her. He saw the predator that had been hiding in plain sight. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. What could he say? He had been a loud, blustering fool, and his arrogance had almost gotten them all killed. He was a footnote in her report. Vance paid him no mind. He was no longer part of the equation. She walked toward the exit of the TOC, her job here complete. As she passed Thorne, he simply nodded, his eyes filled with a new, profound respect. It was not the respect for a superior officer, but the respect of one professional for a master of their craft. The next morning, a new order had settled over FOB vigilance. It was quieter, more focused. The bravado was gone, replaced by a sober professionalism. The base was running on the thrum of backup generators, the air still tasting of ozone, but it felt more secure than it ever had before. The men and women worked with a new sense of purpose, their faith in the system of rank shaken, their belief in pure competence solidified. Vance was in her small room, packing a single duffel bag with Spartan efficiency. There was a soft knock on her door. It was Sergeant Thorne. He held 2 mugs of steaming coffee. He offered one to her without a word. Vance took it, her gaze analytical. "The coffee is a gesture of social bonding," she stated. Not as a question, but as an observation. A ritual to acknowledge a shift in the established hierarchy. Thorne managed a small, tired smile. "Or it's just coffee, ma'am. You looked like you could use it." He hesitated for a moment. "That thing you did, with the mountain, how did you know it would work?" Vance took a sip of the coffee. "It was a matter of calculation," she said. "The universe is governed by laws. Rock, water, energy, human beings. They all follow a predictable path if you have enough data. The enemy was a problem. I found the variable that solved the equation." Thorne shook his head in wonder. To him, it had been a miracle. To her, it was just math. "And the recruits? With the rifle, you weren't scared?" "Fear is a chemical reaction," Vance replied, her voice distant, as if reciting from a textbook. "A sympathetic nervous system response to a perceived threat. I perceived the threat. I simply chose not to grant it the corresponding reaction. It was inefficient." An hour later, a lone helicopter descended from the gray sky, its rotors beating against the thin air. It landed just long enough for Vance to climb aboard. She gave no goodbyes. She offered no parting words. She simply got on the helicopter, and it lifted away, disappearing back into the clouds, leaving FOB vigilance behind. She left as she had arrived, a ghost, leaving nothing behind but a legend and the deep, abiding silence of a mountain that had been taught a new, terrible lesson. They never saw her again, but for years afterward, new soldiers stationed at the rebuilt and renamed FOB Bastion would hear the story, or they would hear about the arrogant captain who was broken by a quiet civilian. They would hear about the day the mountain screamed. And they would hear about the woman they called Ghost, the analyst who saw the world in a different spectrum, who could read the language of stone, and who, when the moment came, wielded a mountain as a weapon. She was not a soldier who became a legend. She was a legend who had, for a short time, pretended to be a person, a quiet professional whose legacy was not written in medals or citations, but in the silent, solid rock of the Zagros Massif, and in the humbled respect of those who witnessed her work.